Hello and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host, and today I'm joined by one of my longtime friends and colleagues in Connecticut, Attorney Uswah Khan, who's here to help us today with the issue of restraining orders. So first, Uswah, I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Susan, for having me on. It's a pleasure to be talking to you and seeing you again.
I know we were just talking. Usually we're emailing these days or texting. And I want, my listeners know I bring on my friends and colleagues, wherever I can, because I'm so lucky to know a wealth of professionals who are not only experts in their areas, but are truly fantastic people. And so you're very much at the top of that list.
Oh,
And
thank you.
it being this episode, we just were talking about this. This episode's going to air in October, and October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Serious topic, something that absolutely needs awareness. We need to bring more awareness to it. And so I knew I wanted to do an episode around domestic violence and around restraining orders because there's so much misunderstanding and just a need for knowledge there, especially for those who are victims of domestic violence. And I immediately thought of you, reached out to you, and we just talked about this a couple of days ago, and here you are, we're taping the show. So again, I thank you for coming. And I know that this is going to be extremely helpful for listeners. So thank you.
You're welcome. And that's the point.
Yes. Well, and let me tell people why I reached out to you. So Uswah is an attorney in Connecticut. We practiced together for, you're coming up on almost 20 years of practice. And we've known each other since we had a case together. Like, you were my opposing counsel eons ago. Then we shared office space, and we've just known each other in a variety of different ways. Uswah has always been one of my go-to people if I needed to refer a case. But for the past couple of years, you have been a staff attorney at the Family Justice Center in Connecticut, and that serves and assists victims of domestic violence who, sadly for you and for your clients, you've been immersed in this world of domestic
Yeah.
violence for a couple of years.
Yes.
And so I know, and you're not there any longer, but we're going to be talking about resources for people at the end of this episode. I do also want to point out to our listeners, you and I talked about the importance of making sure everyone understands. You're licensed to practice in Connecticut. I'm licensed to practice in Connecticut, California. Any advice or anything that you hear here may be very specific to those states.
Right.
So we're really going to try and talk at a high level. And we strongly urge you to reach out to your local court system, to a local domestic violence center, and or to an attorney in your area for more specific advice. That's very important to understand because this is a complicated area. But let's dive into domestic violence restraining orders or temporary restraining orders or protective order. I mean, there's a million different ways people talk about them. So I'm thinking, let's start there.
Yeah. So a protective order gets entered almost automatically. Police gets called to your house. There's an arrest made. Most likely, the police will give you a protective order and send the person who harmed you away from your house. And then there's a court arraignment, there's a hearing. But that protective order is a criminal protective order. It usually protects you. If you have children, it might protect them at least until that first court date. And then sometimes longer, 6 months, a year. I've seen protective orders that extend for 20 years because the crime was so heinous. So that's criminal. It's automatic. You don't have to do anything. With the temporary restraining orders, it's a little more trickier because you have to file an ex parte affidavit. You have to go to court and fill out an affidavit, let the judge know why it is that you are seeking the court to protect you from this person, because it comes under like a civil protective order category, and it's against somebody who's been in an intimate relationship with you or somebody who resides with you, somebody who's related to you, and that's the protective order. There's also a civil protective order, but the temporary restraining order applies to those three people that I just mentioned. And so you write your affidavit, you submit if you have any text messages or any pictures or a police report, you might want to submit that as an attachment, and the judge will get those, um, you know, like the restraining order, and usually within like an hour or two, they'll rule on it, and there'll be a marshal in court. The marshal takes the papers, delivers it to the other person. And so once that initial restraining order is granted, it's good for 2 weeks. If you put on your affidavit that you're the person who you're afraid of has a firearm, then the court will expedite that restraining order and have the hearing within a week. So,
Okay. Yeah. So I just want to, because I want to back up a bit,
yeah.
because there's a lot in there for people to understand. And I think this is what makes it so complicated for people. So first you said ex parte. You have to go to court ex parte. What does that mean?
So ex parte just means that the other party's not there to defend themselves about what you're writing on that affidavit. So it means that you just walk into court and fill out the application. You don't have to show service on the other side. You don't have to get them to prove anything. It's just your word that the judge is looking at.
Right. So, and you referenced that. I think it's important that people understand it's your word on an affidavit, and an affidavit is a sworn statement, right? You're swearing that the information you're giving to the court is true and accurate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a key part. And I love that you mentioned the affidavit, because when I was in Connecticut and helped clients at times prepare the paperwork to go into court for this initial ex parte restraining order, the affidavit itself is kind of the place where you get to tell your story of
Yes.
what has happened. And I would always tell them that they, as hard as it might be, they need to be as specific as possible. And you referenced they can attach certain evidentiary items like pictures and things like that. But, you know, tell people what information needs to go into that affidavit.
So the court wants to see that you've been subjected to a continuous threat of present physical pain or physical injury or stalking or a pattern of stalking. So whatever there is that proves that to the court is what you put in. And sometimes, you know, like somebody might have said to you, I'm going to kill you, don't come home. And that might not mean anything. But if you know that a year ago, the two of you had a fight and he purchased a gun, and now he's saying that like it's important to say that, you know, to give a little background in history also, because sometimes it doesn't happen in a vacuum. You may have had other instances where the person was abusive to you and just not reported, because not everything gets reported. People make up and, you know, they kind of hush things over and go on with their lives. But I think you have to definitely put in a little bit of a background, and then put as much detail as possible about what's going on right now. Like, does he have a GPS tracker on your car? You know, is he ghost copying and reading all your text messages? Like, what is it that he's doing that's making you fearful?
Yeah, it's so important. And it's that imminent, that fear of imminent harm, right? That's what, because I think listeners need to understand, when you're going into court and the other person does not at that time, because it's ex parte, have the opportunity to defend themselves, this is extreme. The whole reason the court has created this avenue for you to go and get this order is because you have to be in fear and have reasonable grounds to believe that imminently this person is going to harm you. And so you need to give that factual basis for a judge to sort of, I'm going to say, hang their robe on, right? Hang their gavel on, exactly, so that they can issue this, right? Because they're going to issue it. I think you said in Connecticut, it's for an initial 2-week, 14-day time period where the other person has no ability to defend themselves, but you need to put in there, you know, I think your example was perfect, right? A year ago, my spouse or partner purchased a firearm 6 months ago, they punched the wall next to my head during an argument. I've had that happen in a number of cases where they were not physically violent with you, but they were 6 inches away from your head or something when they punched the wall. And that type of information on, June 5th, they grabbed my arm so hard that it left bruising. I've attached a picture. Usually, as you said, unfortunately, domestic violence is not a one-time thing, and it doesn't happen in a vacuum. So it's important to set out all of those reasons. I think you use the word continuous pattern of abuse or harm. So that's that affidavit, because again, at least in Connecticut, you're not going to see the judge for this initial order. It's your paperwork that's going to go in front of a judge who's probably sitting in their chambers, drinking a cup of coffee and reading through these, right?
Absolutely. When I was a clerk right after law school, I used to walk the restraining orders up to the judge, and while walking up the flight of stairs, I would read it. And there's certain things that just stand out in certain restraining orders where you see the red flags, like this is dangerous. This person, her or his life is at risk here, and you have to convey that message.
Yeah.
To your time.
We talked about just before we got started that there are certain, any type of physical abuse, stalking, and we'll talk about what stalking is in a minute, but there are certain things, where someone hurts you in some way, they punch you, they slap you, they kick you, they bite you, they push you. There are certain things that are going to jump off the page to a judge, because when someone is physically violent, they are often, again, physically violent. So those are definitely those things that you want to get in there. But you did mention stalking. Now, not every state includes stalking behaviors as a predicate for a restraining order. Connecticut, we're lucky that they do. But let's talk a little bit about stalking, because that's a very common behavior in domestic violence as well.
Yeah, so stalking could be you live at the end of a cul-de-sac and you notice the car driving around your house twice a day, or it's coincidental that every time you're leaving school you see somebody, or it could be an ex-boyfriend, or just you feel followed, or you feel like they know your movements. And today with technology, there's so many ways that somebody can stalk you. And people put out public information. I'm at the gym, I'm working out. Well, you're letting people know where you are, but be careful. It might be getting into the wrong hands also.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point just for everyone out there. General advice, we've done an episode on this. Get off your social media if you're going through a domestic violence or a domestic matter, a divorce, a separation, co-parenting issues. Don't be on social media. But certainly if you are in fear of physical or harm from your intimate partner or a family member, you almost give them a map to track you by posting, see me working out, see me walking through Whole Foods. I remember a client I had back, and this is so many years ago, and this is actually before Connecticut had stalking as a part of our restraining order. So that says it's probably like 20 years ago or so, but her husband every night would go park out in the street outside her house to see if she had any company coming over. He had guns, and there was a great deal of fear that was engendered around it. There were some other complicating factors in that, but we had to go to court and get a restraining order. It was harder in that particular case because there was no physical harm and stalking behaviors were not recognized at that time. We did get it, but it took a lot more effort than an ex parte motion.
Right. I wanted to add on also, it doesn't just have to be physical abuse to you. It could be like somebody slashed your car tires or broke your rear view mirror, because you might not have proof of it, but if you couple that with other facts that have been going on, you might be able to assume that it was this person that slashed my tires. That car is an extension of you. And so, harm to that car or to your pet is harm to you.
Yeah. Well, and I'm so glad you brought up the pets, because this is just a very pervasive issue in domestic violence cases where the abuser will not harm you, but will go after your beloved pet. Right. And there's a variety, it's a way of controlling the victim. Your behaviors will be modified because you're acting out of fear that your pet's going to be harmed. Many domestic violence victims will not leave because they can't take their pet with them or protect their pet. And abusers know how to get to you, right? They know what's valuable or important to you, and your pet is. So restraining orders can cover pets in some states.
That's right. And children also.
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
and that's, I don't mean to put pets above children, everyone. So don't send me DMs on that. And that is important to realize as well. Even a temporary restraining order can have orders protecting your children in the household or other members of the household, and may even put into place a bar on parenting time if they feel the children are imminent harm. But you have to include reason to believe the children are in danger, don't you?
Right. You have to show that he was also abusive towards the children, or that they witnessed this abuse, or that they could have been hurt by his actions.
Yeah, because good point there about witnessing the abuse, because that's a form of actual abuse to the children, right? When mom or dad or partner is being abused physically or verbally in front of children, that is actually abusive to the children as well, right?
It definitely is, and that DCF here in Connecticut would probably get involved and take some action if they knew that the children were witnessing this abuse also.
Right. And unfortunately, in our households, especially, during COVID, where we've all been trapped in our homes together, and which has also led to a big rise unfortunately, in domestic violence incidents. But so often now the kids weren't away at school. Right. Because they were homeschooling, video learning, remote learning. Mm-hmm. And so not only has domestic violence gone up, but children's exposure to domestic violence in the home has gone up.
Yes.
So you mentioned that once so we've gone through this process of filling out the paperwork, and I do want people to know, just go to your clerk's office in your local courthouse. They're going to have the papers for you, or go online. I know Connecticut, I know California, I imagine almost every state has those forms available to you to fill out PDF form right online. Right. So you don't even need to go to the courthouse.
Yeah, you don't need to go to the courthouse. They do have some victims' rights offices in the courthouse sometimes, and they will help you fill out the form in the proper way, and help you marshal your evidence so that it presents a compelling story for the judge.
That's a good point. A lot of courthouses have a victim's right advocate or somebody who can be there to help you. Many of them will also have online guides that are going to talk to you about much of what we're talking about here. So definitely do a little bit of research and Google, just domestic violence resources. And again, I'm going to put some of those into the show notes because I want them to be easily accessible to everyone, but I can't put the court system for every single state into the show notes, or my show notes would be 100 pages long. So I do want to make sure people understand, and we'll talk a bit more about what you said. The paperwork has been signed now by a judge, but there's a further step that you mentioned with a marshal. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So each courthouse will have a marshal or a sheriff or a process server. They'll tell you how to access one so that they can serve notice on the person that you filed the restraining order against, because that restraining order is only effective for 2 weeks, but there's a hearing date set on that paperwork. And so the person that you filed this restraining order against has to be notified about that hearing date so that they can come to court and defend themselves at the end of that 2-week period.
Okay. And I think one thing that I always would tell clients, especially when they were going in ex parte, so they didn't have counsel, is to make sure to give that marshal or sheriff or process server as much information about the whereabouts of where they might find the person in order to serve them, right?
Definitely, because If they're not served, they're not going to show up to the hearing in 2 weeks, and then you're going to be asking the judge to continue the restraining order for another 2 weeks so that you can find him.
Right.
Or
Or her, right? Exactly. And I don't want to talk about the restraining orders as if they are only ever issued against men. Restraining orders are issued against anyone and everyone who is perpetrating abusive behaviors. And very often that is women. Women do this as well. And I've had restraining orders to protect men served against women. So I don't in any way want people to think domestic violence is just a man perpetrated on female type of phenomena. But unfortunately, statistics say it's a greater preponderance of the domestic abuse that we see. Now let's talk about that additional hearing. So this later in Connecticut 2 week, and I think most states are around that 14 days that, because it's such an extreme remedy to bar this person in certain ways, restrain this person's rights to, see their children, be in their home, do certain things. The court wants to be certain they have their day in court. So there will be this hearing. What happens there?
So typically before the hearing starts in Connecticut, there's a family relations office, and you go to them, you present your side of the story, they talk to you, then they will talk to the abuser. They will run a lethality assessment to see if the person's had any other arrests or previous restraining orders, not just against you, but against other people as well. And then, sometimes people reach an agreement. The abuser might say, what, I don't want to deal with this. Here's an agreement. I'm going to stay away from you for 6 months, for a year. And you go up to the judge, you present the agreement, and you're on your way. If you don't have an agreement, then family relations will let the judge know that there's no agreement. The parties are coming up for a hearing. And that's your time to go in front of the judge and just speak your truth. You have to tell the judge that same story that you wrote on the affidavit, but now you're not limited to a page or two. You're limited to a person actually listening to you, observing your behavior, observing the other person's response to you as you're talking about your story. And so all that is very important.
Yeah, and they're usually there in the courtroom, right? So the person that you have the restraining order against, that you're seeking to extend the time period of that restraining order, is sitting at the other table.
Right. And
in most cases,
Connecticut has allowed where you can file a form and request to not be in the same room and, like show up on a screen in front of the judge. But I still think it's more effective to be in person in front of that judge, because you want to show your emotions, but I think the reaction from the other side is just as important sometimes.
Yeah. And that is the other part of that hearing, right? They have that opportunity now to present their side of what has happened. And in part of that may be trying to refute your evidence, saying that, well, that doesn't tell the whole story, or that's not true.
Right.
And so you have to be prepared for that as well.
You do. And, they might bring their own witnesses to testify against you. So you just have to calculate in your mind that this person is going to come in with his best friend. They're going to come in with a video of me or text messages of me to nobody wants a restraining order, so they want to prove themselves innocent.
Right.
And it's your job, but you have to show the judge why you need that restraining order. So if you have text messages, print them out, bring them as evidence. If you have pictures of abuse or pictures of the hole, he punched into the wall, you print that out, you bring it, you show the judge those. If you have recorded something, like a picture's worth 1,000 words, but a video is just, it just tells the whole story, as long as it's the complete video, because you don't want the other side to show, well, Your Honor, yes, she showed you what happened the last 10 minutes, but the first 30 minutes, this is what was going on. So.
You actually had that case, right?
I did. I thought it was I was horrified looking at the video evidence, and I thought, oh my God, the judge is going to just, it's going to be an easy hearing. Turned into a 4-hour hearing. The other side had lots of video, had testimony, had friend come in and testify, and that restraining order did not get granted.
Yeah. And I want to say, we're not trying to dissuade people from seeking the restraining orders. Just understand the ex parte is just you and what you have to say. When you come in for that later hearing, it's now both sides of the story. So expect that, be prepared for that. And videos, one of the most potent videos I ever had in a case was the one from someone's doorbell camera. And that, they just happened to check. They had forgotten they even had one of those Ring doorbells, and it showed, what happened on that doorstep. And I don't want to go into the detail, but, as you say, a video is worth more than a picture. And you may have more video than you think. It's not just our little electronic devices. These days, there's video almost everywhere.
And another point is sometimes the police might have been called, and you might have a police report, and you definitely would want to subpoena that police officer so you can get that police report into evidence if it's favorable to you. In Connecticut, a lot of the officers are now wearing body cams, so you might want that body cam footage also to come in to support your case.
Right. That was an important point you just made about the police report and the police officer. Maybe go into that a little bit more.
Yeah. So, as a victim, you can get a copy of your police report, but you can't get that in front of the judge unless the police officer is there to testify that that was the officer and he observed this and he's the one that wrote this in the normal course of business as his duty as a police officer. So you would have to subpoena that police officer so that you can have that report admitted into evidence.
Right. And I suggest that's such a key and critical point. How many times have we been in a courtroom and a pro se party or a self-represented party is there with a very impactful police report, and they can't get it in front of the judge because they don't have the police officer there. So understand, you need to bring the actual witness. That's the police officer. There's a whole process in place for getting a subpoena to bring that police officer in. It happens all the time. Find out what that process is. Check with your clerk's office, your domestic violence center, your support center, your attorney, but find that out so that your evidence is the best that it can be. And a police report can be extremely impactful.
Absolutely. But make sure you read it before you submit it into evidence, because there might be something on there that you don't want the court to know.
Yes, and that's true. And by the way, you don't get to redact portions and only submit the parts you like. Just as you don't get to show only, or you might not have the opportunity to just show 10 minutes of a video when 30 minutes, the first 20 minutes doesn't cast you in a good light. Always understand that if the evidence is out there, it might be out there on both sides. So trying to play the system may come back to, I would imagine in your case, your client's credibility took a bit of a hit when they didn't reveal what happened in the first part of that argument.
Absolutely. And you have to be mindful about social media posts also, because some people post things on Facebook that are public. I can go in there and print it out. And if I'm posting things about somebody's girlfriend or just anything that makes me look like maybe I'm not that much of a victim, or I'm not really scared of this person who I'm claiming to be scared of, that's something you have to be really mindful of.
It was such a good point, and it brings up something else that is super common, right? These are people who are in intimate relationships.
Right.
So they get into a fight or they get into an altercation, somebody gets a restraining order, and then a couple of days down the road, they get together. Somebody comes over, they start making contact, nobody complains. What effect does that have on that 14-day hearing? And another question I used to get from people is, are they going to get in trouble as the person who got the restraining order for violating it?
I would say if you are going, or you're getting back together, that you withdraw that restraining order application, because it's more harmful to the person you filed the restraining order against. Because if you and this person have a fight and you call the police, that person's now committed a felony and it's a criminal offense. So it's best if you withdraw that restraining order application. So nobody, I mean, your credibility will be out the window if you have to file a subsequent restraining order application.
Well, and that's why, you need to take it seriously, but you also, when you are you go to the lengths of getting this extreme remedy of a restraining order, and then you act as if it were unnecessary by allowing that person back into your home, into your life. Your credibility at that 14-day hearing, I mean, what are the chances you're actually going to have a judge say, well, obviously we need to continue this, he's in fear of imminent harm or physical danger? You're not, if you've allowed this person to be
And
around.
that's the point that I've, as a counsel representing the person who the restraining order was granted against, I've used
Sure.
that argument that, you weren't in fear when you asked him for a ride day 5 of the restraining order. You weren't in fear when you asked him to drop off food for you. So tell me now, like, are you in fear today?
Right. Well, and it's an extremely common situation. So I'm not, again, I don't want that to come across as victim blaming, or I'm just saying be aware of the consequences ultimately to all of the actions. This is very complicated emotional stuff for people. We
It
are
is.
bonded with our abusers in many ways, or people are, and it can be very difficult to break that connection, even when you have that restraining order. But in your best interest, certainly in your children's best interest, sometimes maybe you have to make that break.
Yeah. And, that's why family justice centers all over the country are so amazing, because they give you all that support in one place. Like, if you need a safe house, they can get you a safe house. If you need counseling, you can get counseling. If you need food, they might have a food pantry. If you need a lawyer, they might have a lawyer on site that they can refer you to. And, counseling is probably the key to helping your own mindset and to help you grow out of this um, horrific time period that you've been engaged in.
Yeah, it is such a intrinsic and intractable issue, right? Because it's a slippery slope with abuse. It doesn't usually start out at this high level of physical harm. It's, they start to cut you off from those who are around you. They cut you off from money. They cut, they start to belittle and denigrate your inner, feelings about yourself. And by the time it gets to a violent, abusive situation, you are often broken down in many, many ways. And so that counseling, just to understand and start to gather your strength to crawl back out of that, is so critical. And the family justice centers are wonderful. I am going to link to that resource in the show notes for everyone, as well as I do want to mention the National Domestic Violence Hotline. I'll have that number in there as well. One last thing I want to hit on is what happens when there is a restraining order in place, be it the temporary initial one for the 14 days or an extended version, and somebody does violate it.
So that's when you call 911, or if it's not something that you need to call the police for, you go into the police station, you file a report. They usually have a copy of that restraining order in the central registry. But if you bring it with you, that's fine also. And you let them know how the person's violated it. And then it becomes a criminal matter. Criminal court gets involved, and they might, it's a felony. So that person has to go to court then and show up and defend themselves against a felony.
Right. So now it's gone into a completely different court system in that criminal court. And I just want to say to people, if you are in fear, if someone is violating a restraining order, or if you don't have a restraining order, but you feel that you are in danger, your children are in danger, call 911 and see and do what you can to remove yourself and your children from the situation as quickly as possible. Seek help. Don't be afraid to call 911. It is probably the most important thing that you can do. I'm going to do an additional episode on just domestic violence awareness, how to get it. The most dangerous time they know is when you try to leave.
Right.
And by dangerous, I mean fatal. That is when most homicides occur in domestic violence situations, or serious physical harm. And so I'm going to have a whole episode on how to, an exit plan, how to safely get out. But the restraining order is a tool that is there to protect you. It takes, it takes a lot to go there and tell your story, even to put it on paper, but it is one of the most helpful ways to start helping you to protect yourself, your children, your pets, and get your life back. So, Uswah, thank you so much for coming and sharing, your experience and this advice for my listeners. It is a topic that is even hard to talk about, for us, because we've seen people, you especially for the past couple of years, right? Every day who are in this place. It is a scary, dark place. And there is hope. You've seen people get out. So maybe share just a few words for the people who are listening.
Yeah, you're not alone. And this is your story and your truth, and you have to let it out and just align yourself with the proper support system that you need to help you get through this. And you will get through it, because that's why there's so many survivors out there who have gone to the other side and are able to tell their story. And there's people out there to help you.
So I love that. I'm going to leave it on that, everyone. You are not alone. So, Uswah, thank you so much.
You're welcome. So good to see you.
You too.